Is there a message of necessity at the desk? There is a message of necessity at the desk. Move to accept the message of necessity. The message is accepted.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of Messages of Necessity. My name is Kyle Davis. I'm the Director of Public Affairs at the Empire Center. And today I have the privilege of sitting down with Z, our new Executive Director. How are you doing today, Z?
Doing well. It's finally stopped raining, so it's a nice and sunny day here in Cohoes.
Hey, there you go. That's good. Yeah, Z, for this podcast episode, we really want to give our audience an opportunity to get to know who you are a little bit better, have them understand your background, because they're going to be seeing your face a lot more around the Empire Center associated with our work. So, just to kick things off, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are?
That's an awfully philosophical question, but if we're going sort of the professional route, so prior to this, for 5 years, I was the president of Foundation for Economic Education, one of the oldest, if not the oldest, center-right think in the United States. So I started that in 2019. Prior to that, I was over in Europe, in Lithuania, the head of a Lithuanian Free Market Institute. It was a policy and education shop, and we did a whole lot of policy analysis, arguing with politicians, proposing things, and getting things done. And just like Empire Center, punching way above our weight. So that's kind of, I'm in a liberty world, or I'm in a liberty business since 2006. If we rewind even more, I got my bachelor's degree in Wesleyan, Connecticut, out of all places. And if you don't know Wesleyan, that place makes Harvard look conservative. Prior to that, I was in UK. I was studying in a uber fancy boarding school on the Atlantic coast, situated in a 12th century castle. So imagine Harry Potter sort of setting. So I was there. And if we rewind even further, I had a misfortune of being born on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain. I was born in 1981 in Soviet-occupied Lithuania. Lithuania was incorporated against its will into Soviet Union. So when it comes to socialism, when it comes to actual socialism, or, so Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and living under socialism, that's entire childhood of mine. I actually have lived in socialism, under socialism, and a couple of years ago, when I was going through an immigration process, they asked me for a birth certificate, and actually had to dig that one up. So the birth certificate it's in Russian, and it has a hammer and a sickle on the front. So it's as socialist as it gets.
Oh wow. So Z, I didn't fully, I guess I didn't put it together that yeah, you grew up in a socialist country, in a socialist area. How has that impacted the way in which your worldview? I have to imagine that is why you're now working for a free market oriented think tank.
That's one of the reasons. It's usually with people who lived under socialism, they are the best anti-socialists that and it's quite on the contrary. It's people who've never experienced it or who think that Sweden is socialist. It's who are kind of socialist in the West. Yeah, so I think I'm very well inoculated against the idea of socialism because you name it, we had it. An ownership of a means of production by the government, check. Every price regulated, check. Curtailment or censorship or sort of, I guess, canceling of people because of dissenting opinions, check. Except rather than canceling and making them unpopular in social media, obviously in Soviet times, the cancellation meant imprisonment, deportation, or worse. So, very sort of long, short answer to your question. It made me very anti-socialist, and I think it made me appreciate capitalism even more. And it's one of those things that people usually take for granted then we live in it. And I think even if we expand our worldview, not just the United States or not just to capitalism as ideology, if we think about human freedom, ability to do what you want, when you want, ability to choose your own destiny or pursuit of happiness, that I think is a relatively recent phenomenon. If we look at a history of a scale of human history, I think it's only in the past couple of hundred of years that really the common man, the average person, the non-royal and non-nobility could actually start doing what he or she wants with their lives. So I think that's the glimpse, the blip of freedom which we
Mhm.
had for the past couple of hundred of years, and I think we absolutely have to preserve and build on it, because dictatorship, either by a socialist or by someone else, is not that too far away.
Absolutely. So Z, based on some of the work that you did in Lithuania, what are some of the first contrasts that you've seen between New York State and, working under or working for in a country that kind of just had escaped socialism? Do you see any parallels, any similarities, any differences? Uh, what's your initial observations here?
I, I know that's the most interesting question people like to ask me, and I usually give the most boring answer. It's kind of everything is kind of similar, and then
Yeah.
people say, "Well, it cannot be," but I say, "Well, it is actually pretty similar." So humans are universal. So regardless of country, creed, or country of origin, people want the same things. They want the good life for their families. They want to feel secure. They want to some sort of self-realization, and that's universal. Go to any other country, or even not a country. Go to any other place, and people have that desire. Um, I'd say the biggest difference, even if we're comparing Europe and United States, is that Americans don't realize that they actually wealthy. And now it doesn't seem that way, especially if you view Europe from a tourist angle. When you go to Paris or Rome or any other country, then you only see like the glitzy places.
Yeah.
Uh, on average, an average European is earns significantly less than an average American. I think, there's good graphics somewhere that if Sweden were a United States state, would be among the poorest somewhere in Alabama. So once again, we could go in. International comparisons are notoriously difficult because there are so many different things that are sometimes called the same name. So if you wanna get messed up, start doing international comparisons. But I would say
Yeah.
on average, Americans are kind of richer than Europeans, and the economy is much larger than that of Europe. So I think that would be a big major difference.
So do you think that like the history of, freedom or liberty in the United States, the traditions there have any significant impact? I don't, obviously I'm not familiar with Lithuania, but I have to imagine that while there is definitely a history there, it's much obviously much different than in the United States. Having been behind the Iron Curtain.
Well, yeah, but it's so once again, a scientific answer would be actually European Commission. 10 years ago, they were sort of even commissioning a study of why are Americans more entrepreneurial. They
Yeah.
basically said, like 9 out of 10 largest companies are in the United States. If you look at prevalence of small businesses compared to people who are employed, or even compared self-employed people to employees, you have more of those in the United States. Why is that? And of course, there are many reasons like the tax regime difference and so on and so on. But one of the most interesting explanations I've heard is that it is genetic. And the way it is genetic, they say that the risk-loving people have more risk-loving children, and risk-averse people who hate risk, they have children who are more sort of hating or not liking to take up risks.
Hmm.
And they say the big break in that sort of genetic split of Europeans to Americans was then people embarked on a voyage over the Atlantic to the United States. So one of their explanations, basically, the more risk tolerant people, the more risk takers, they went to the United States and continued sort of having risk taking kids in there, while the more risk averse people stayed in Europe and continued their European stuff. Ergo, uh, Americans are more sort of risk takers and entrepreneurial. That's a very interesting explanation in a field of genetics that I know nothing about. To add, I would say tradition plays quite a large role, even though once again, as
Yeah.
everything in this world, traditions are getting muddled. But the feeling, at least the way we see Europeans see America while in Europe, it's kind of a land of the free and the brave. You can make anything of yourself in United States, and actually one of the big drivers for people from Europe coming to the United States, that was regardless once again of your creed or religion, on what ethnic group you come from, you can make something of yourself in the United States. So I think, and again, obviously, I'm biased in the way I feel about this, but I feel that this
Yeah.
kind of a declaration of freedom, be all you can be, work hard, play hard mentality is one of the significant factors that led United States to being the richest and the most powerful country in the world. And once again, we could go into different comparisons. Why did that not work in Mexico or in Latin America? Or when did, let's say, countries like Argentina started slipping? Because if you remember, back in the 20s, 30s, people were making predictions. Serious people were making predictions that Argentina is going to be like the United States of South America, is going to be one of the richest countries. And at some point, it was like number 3 or number 4 richest country in the world. So I think that plays a. So this shows what importance ideas have. Sometimes
Right.
people like to dismiss ideas as just mere decoration on an already good cake. But I could say you can take a very good country with very good people, very good resources, all the sort of natural endowments that you can think of, and you can absolutely ruin it with bad ideas.
I think you're exactly right. Consequences absolutely do have ideas, and that's why, as think tanks, we're in the business of ideas, and we want to make sure that the best ideas and the ideas that help humans flourish are at the forefront of the conversation. So, Z, going off the concept of ideas, I guess I'll say, what are some of the biggest influences on your thinking? Did you have books that you read, authors that you consumed that really steered you in a certain direction towards a free market oriented mindset?
So what sort of, I was always kind of free market oriented, but I remember I was in my boarding school in UK, and we were studying externalities in economics. So my road to free market, or my road to a, I guess, proper free market started from my study of economics. And I was still in sort of a high school equivalent, but we're studying externalities, and how the government should impose a tax on petrol so that the optimum market outcomes are achieved. And I remember thinking, okay, I can understand the theoretical discussion that perhaps market does not allocate perfectly, but how does the government know what kind of tax to impose to achieve perfect market allocation? And that kind of started my sort of road into thinking. Then I started reading a bunch of Austrian guys from Austrian economics, like Hayek, Schumpeter, later Mises, and that, I guess, kind of codified my worldview when it comes to free markets. Now, I like to pride myself as a guy who not only likes the theory but actually sees that theory applied in practice. So I'm the guy who loves looking at data, and I say, okay, if our ideas are correct, if our worldview is correct, and we got the theoretical background to understand how the world works, that should also be confirmed by data. And if it's not confirmed by data, let's go and look. So I guess I'm a free marketeer that likes to challenge myself always, so that my knowledge of how the world and how the economy works is based on knowledge rather than on faith alone.
Absolutely. I'm right there, very similar process as well. Thomas Sowell had a huge impact on my thinking, just the whole concept of trade-offs and how every decision has a trade-off, I think should inform public policy in a much more robust way than it does. So very much appreciate those authors that you mentioned. Now, Z, you have more of a, I would say, like a global mindset. You've been around the world. You've worked in different countries. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges to liberty and markets globally? Is there anything that stands out to you?
Well, one big challenge is, once again, this world is in part ruled by ideas, and right now, that if, let's say, 30 years ago, 1995, those kind of years, ideas of liberty had it easy because we only had to point at ruins in socialism and pretty much win any argument. Now, it obviously wasn't that easy, and at 1995 I was 14, but it's my feeling that 30 to 25 years ago it was easier arguing free markets with people because the alternative was clearly bankrupt, and that alternative obviously being socialism. I think what started happening after the financial crisis of 2008 is that many of these ideas, which we thought were gone and dead and buried, like socialism, communal ownership of property, and all of that stuff, it actually has been re-legitimized. So now we are back, sort of arguing against the theoretical, improve. We're arguing against socialism in theory because socialism in practice has already been forgotten. If you're 25, if you're young people, Soviet Union is it's kind of a blip in history, kind of like the same as telling people or warning people against French imperialism by pointing out Napoleonic Wars. It seems like ancient history to them. So in a way, we need to restart that argument again. We thought we won, and I guess we were winners for some time in terms of public opinion. But I think some of us haven't realized that since 2008, we actually lost significant ground in the sort of ideas battle. So I would say resurgence of socialist ideas because Soviet Union has been dead for a long time. That's one threat. Second threat is that we ceded the high moral ground in the arguments of ideas. To put it this way, whenever someone proposes the taxes, whenever Governor Hochul proposes a new tax, I think our first instinct, us as free marketeers, say, well, that will reduce GDP growth by 0.1 percentage points over 15 years or something like that. We have forgotten, or we dare not say, why do we need to raise taxes at all? Doesn't government have enough money? Aren't people who are already having difficulty paying their bills, aren't they paying a large enough tax? Isn't New York one of the most taxed countries in the United States? I think we forget all sorts of these arguments. And I guess in a way, some of us on our side are kind of afraid to be conservative or center-right, call it whatever, free marketeers. So I think that's our complacency and our fear of standing by our ideals, I think are the biggest threats. And then of course there are the global factors, Chinese communism, even though it's not communism, that kind of seems attractive to people. But I would say the biggest threat comes from within, and it's our own unwillingness and inability to defend the ideas that we believe.
Absolutely. What did Ronald Reagan say basically, right? That every generation has to protect liberty, and if one generation doesn't, you could lose it forever. And obviously, that's a paraphrase. But Z, I'm also curious, what is your proudest accomplishment? You have been someone known to stand up for free markets, stand up for the ideals in which you believe. I know that you've hosted webinars with tens of thousands of people, but what makes the list is something you're really proud of?
Well, first of all my accomplishments were done with teams of people whom I worked with. So it's kind of accomplishments of the teams that I worked with. So at Foundation for Economic Education, one of the cool things we did is that we had about 10,000 students in a webinar. And that webinar was with Javier Milei, who is now the president of Argentina. But back then he was just a popular politician. So the fact that we managed to get 40,000 people registered and 10,000 people who showed up for a 4-hour lecture about economics by Javier Milei. And we did that on a shoestring budget. That was an impressive accomplishment by the team. In fact, we even called the Guinness Book of Records and said, "Hey guys, I think we just broke the biggest economic lecture of all time record." But you wouldn't believe it, but Guinness World Book of Records, that's a bureaucracy on its own. So after some time, we just gave up about it and we said, "Look, we have more important things to do than to chase down Guinness World Book of Records." So that was significant. Back in Lithuania, we changed many laws. We always had socialists on the defensive. I guess the biggest compliment was that the left politicians and the left opinion leaders, they were complaining that Lithuanian Free Market Institute, the organization I work with, that they had monopolized all the public debate about things. So they would complain that the left ideas were not getting enough attention. They were complaining that free market ideas were dominating airwaves and that an institute of 15 people is basically taking over economic thinking of the country. Now, they tried to say that as an insult. I took it as a compliment.
Absolutely. That's a great compliment.
Yeah, a bunch of other policy things, but once again, many of them are applicable here, even in New York. I remember one of the cool things we did a sort of user-oriented tax calculator. I mean, there are many tax calculators, and we just had a tax day. But an average taxpayer, we sort of created this little app that would show the average taxpayer how much tax he actually pays, and then kind of prints out a receipt where the tax goes to. Because and it has two things. Well, first of all, most people, especially in Europe, because of the withholding laws or withholding systems, they usually only see people in Europe usually see the net salary as opposed to gross salary. I mean, it's imperfect in the United States, but so we launched that app to first of all bring awareness that basically about 50% of what you earn is taxed through income tax, healthcare, social security, and later sales tax or value added tax that they have in Europe. So for most people, that was a shock. They thought the tax burden was maybe 10 or 15%. They didn't realize all of that.
Oh, wow.
So we did that. And then building on the popularity of this discussion, we actually proposed, it's a bureaucratic change. We didn't change the tax burden, but we made it so that now people see the entire gross income on their paycheck, and then they see how much has been deducted to taxes. So all of a sudden, more people now know that the tax burden is closer to, like I said, 30, 35% if we're talking employment, rather than 15%. So that, even though that was a tiny little thing, didn't actually reduce the tax burden, didn't change anything, except that it's been, I think, 7 or 5 years, and people's kind of discussions, how people think about taxes, how people estimate how much taxes they're paying, that's changing. So the moral of the story, I guess, here is that if you want to tell people that you are here to lower their taxes, first of all, people need to know that their taxes are high, because most people don't. And then it's also very important to talk about where the taxes are spent, because I'm sure if you ask a person in the street here in New York, co-host where I live, I'm sure he would think that most of the taxes go to schools and other worthy things. And that is true. Some taxes do go to schools. But I think people be appalled to understand how much taxes or how much of their revenue, how much of their money is simply wasted. So I guess once again, to apply the lessons from Europe to New York, I think that before we sell people solutions, before we tell people, oh, we're here to do this, we need to make sure that people think or that people know that we have a problem. Otherwise, we're just wasting our time.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think on the energy front, that is a big problem. People are not aware in New York how big of a problem this is, and it's coming down the pike. And so you're absolutely right. We at the Empire Center have to sound the alarm to let them know that there is a problem, but let them know that there are also solutions at the end of the day. Z, before we go, I do want to give you an opportunity. Is there anything else you want to add? Personally, I'm very excited to work with you and fight for a better New York. So
Same here. Think of me as a professional freedom fighter, like Che Guevara, but good. That's at least how I like to think of myself. This is my third think tank. This is my approaching 20 years in the business. Uh, this is very exciting. This is a little different from what I've done, but I think New York is very important, not just because it's a big state, and not because it needs a lot of work, but even if we think nationally or even globally, New York is one of those places where ideas are born, and sadly, not all of these ideas are good. So we have a saying in Las Vegas: what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. Well, it's when it comes to politics and policy, it's kind of different in New York. What happens in New York, or bad things that happen in New York, don't stay in New York. So I think here at the Empire Center, we're not just fighting for a better New York, which of course we are, but we're also helping other think tanks and other states and even other countries not to repeat the same mistakes that New York does. And in fact, you know what? After 10 years, when we have this podcast again, I would much rather say, look at all these good, wonderful, great ideas that we created here at Empire State and Empire Center, and look at all these great ideas we actually exported to other states. So I'll raise a glass of champagne to that in maybe 5 to 10 years.
Sounds good, Z. In 10 years, we'll do this podcast again and mark all of our accomplishments. But I would like to thank you for joining us. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning into this episode of Messages of Necessity. Until next time.
For more news and analysis, visit our website and sign up for email updates at empirecenter.org. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Empire Center.